Other than your trip, how was, how was wrapping everything up?
It was good. Yeah, we had really good sessions yesterday too.
Yay.
And I got to sit in on some Google ones, which was nice. So I feel like I got to learn little bit as well. But yeah, got to meet a lot of nice teachers, and it's just
Yay.
exciting to see them excited about stuff that we present. So it
Yeah,
was good
that's always a good feeling
for
when
sure.
you feel like you've actually helped.
Exactly. Rather than just like deadpan faces. People were
Right.
yay, like this is awesome. I could use this with my kids. It's like, yay. Love that.
I love it. Ugh, it's such a good feeling.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm just waiting for the clock to shift over.
Sounds great.
Feeling good? Feeling ready?
Feeling good at this point.
You're like, I can do
Gonna kill it.
anything. Let's hope I remember everything.
You're a pro.
Ugh, not really, but thank you.
Fake it till you make it.
That's what I used to tell kids.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my clock says 3, so you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited on this rainy, maybe it's rainy wherever you are, this rainy Thursday, almost to March, almost to springtime. So, today's webinar, we're so excited to show you the role of assessment in modern education. But before we get started, and as always, go ahead and use the chat to tell us who you are, where you're from, why you're here, your role in education, your favorite emoji. I don't even care. Just form that community down there in the chat and share your X handle, formerly Twitter, so that we can really keep that community going and follow each other and feel like we're pals in the real life, in the real world. And of course, feel free to use the chat area if you have any questions during the webinar. We'll read, and by we, I mean I'll read and we'll react to those messages together, any questions that you might pose throughout the webinar. And there's also that Q&A feature that you can use. Usually we save big questions until the end, but if it's kind of pertinent, I'll interrupt our panelist here, Jamie, and we'll address it when it's right. So I'm sure she won't mind. But most of the time, we're going to collect them and we'll address them at the end. Now, on the technical side, if you're having any issues viewing this window, seeing our faces, our slides, go ahead and just do some troubleshooting, peek behind any other windows that are open. Sometimes you get an extra Zoom window that kind of hides. And if nothing else, go ahead and leave the Zoom and then pop back in using that same link that you used to join the first time and see if that works for you. Sometimes you just got to go through those motions, fake it till you make it, and we'll get there. So if you aren't able to join today and you're seeing this later, we always have that on-demand version. Maybe you are here today and you want to see it again. I wouldn't blame you. So all of those are available to you approximately 30 minutes after the conclusion of today's webinar. If you visit our website, www.forward-edge.net/webinars. So if you want to see all the greatness that has happened across this year, go and watch those recordings because they really are amazing. And of course, feel free to share what you've loved and learned today on Twitter, X, with the hashtag FEK12. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, if you don't know who Forward Edge is, we are a K-12 technology company that's based here in Cincinnati, and we do all things technology for school. And that means everything from infrastructure, networking, devices, cybersecurity, which is a big one these days, to support on-site technicians, coordinators, and things of that nature. We do all things ed tech, from hanging those projectors in classrooms to helping teachers and staff when they need someone to help them right then and there. But a couple of years ago, the people at Forward Edge really started to wonder, once we get all of that technology into the hands of students and teachers, where do we go from there? And that's how curriculum and integration was born. And that's where we come in. A lot of us in CNI are former teachers with a vast amount of past experience and a lot to bring to the table. And now we serve as on-site coaches, which is what I'm doing now and what Jamie, our panelist, does on the daily. And we go into schools and help teachers with how to integrate that technology meaningfully, robustly into the classroom to help our students and the teachers with things like productivity. So we've got a lot of different things going on, but we're kind of a one-stop shop for all things ed tech. And of course, we have our amazing presenter today, Jamie Kalasius. Did I say it right, Jamie?
You did on the
I'm the
on the head.
worst. I'm the worst with last names, and that's because mine's the worst. And if you haven't been here today or before today, my name is Tori Millette. I am your webinar host and an instructional design coach full time. And my awesome colleague Jamie here today is going to talk to you about assessment in modern education. So, Jamie, unless I've forgotten anything, I'm going to throw this over to you and you can get this party started. How's that sound?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tori.
Yes, ma'am.
Alrighty, so thanks again for coming and joining us today for this webinar. Before we get into the content about assessment, we're going to take a look at the ISTE standards for educators. And today we're going to be focusing in on the analyst standard. We're going to get into how teachers can offer alternate assessments to their students using tech to create those assessments, as well as making sure that teachers are using data to guide progress in their classrooms. All right, and I have our agenda for today so you can see exactly where we are headed. To start off, we are going to talk about balancing formative and summative assessments. Then we're going to get into some innovative ways in order for you to create assessments in your classroom. And then we're going to wrap up with data-driven instructional adaptation. All right, so like I said, let's break down the similarities and differences between formative and summative assessments. So we'll start with formative assessments. I like to think of formative assessments as ways that can inform instruction. So kind of like little checkpoints throughout a unit to allow you as the teacher to really understand where your students are with their learning. And when I thought about formative assessments, these are some of the examples that really came to mind. So using exit tickets in class, kind of like the standard mid-unit quiz. It could even be as simple as a thumbs up or a thumbs down. At the end of a lesson for the day, you could simply ask your students, hey guys, give me a thumbs up based on how you're feeling with the lesson today. Give me a thumbs down if you're not feeling great on it and you feel like you need a little bit more help. So a formative assessment could be pretty as simple as that. Quick writes are also a great formative assessment to use for students. It allows students to quickly jot down their ideas and kind of get those out of their heads onto the paper. And then you as a teacher can review those to see how your students are doing throughout your lessons. So those are some of my thoughts on formative assessments. If you have any other ideas to share, feel free to drop those in the chat. Maybe think of some formative assessments that you've used in your classroom. Feel free to pop those in the chat and we can get a conversation going. That's formative assessments. Let's take a look at the flip side. So summative assessments. And summative assessments are used to evaluate overall student learning. So a little bit bigger picture when it comes to assessments. And again, when I think of that, I think of semester exams. So I used to teach high school science before I was an instructional coach. And obviously at the end of every semester, there was always some type of semester exam for my students to take to really demonstrate their learning. In addition, those could be standardized tests, end of unit projects. So not even in the form of a test, but more of a project to demonstrate student learning. And then maybe even like an oral presentation. So again, just kind of a big picture idea of how your students are doing in class. And as you can see there, if you do have any other thoughts on summative assessments, feel free to drop those in the chat. Okay, so let's do a little bit of compare and contrast here. I'm a science teacher, former science teacher, and we would do a lot of comparing and contrasting. Great way just to visualize this out. So some best practices and when to use both of these types of assessments. Like I said, with formative assessments, it's great to use these throughout a unit, and they're great to to provide ongoing feedback to your students. They allow students to really understand where they are in their learning. If they're not performing so well on one of these smaller formative assessments, that's a hint to them, but it's also a hint to you as the teacher in order to step in and fill in some of those gaps. And then you can see right there at the bottom, formative assessments are also really great for identifying student strengths, so where the students are doing really well, but then also room for improvement. I don't like to think of them as weaknesses, but more so room for improvement where students can actually be progressing in class. And then on the flip side, like we were already talking about, summative assessments are great at the end of a unit. Their main point or best use is for measuring those learning outcomes and sometimes even comparing them to learning standards, maybe when it comes to one of those state tests. But as you can see there in the middle, both types of assessments definitely have a place in the classroom because they can really be utilized for understanding student learning, but then also improving student learning as well. So both are equally as important, but just used in different cases. Okay, so now that we've got a baseline, let's talk about some innovative ways to assess your students in class. And I like to think of this as going beyond traditional assessments. And this is where you can get a little creative. I think of myself as a creative person, not a wildly creative person. So when I think back to my time in the classroom, trying to be creative with assessments was fun, can be a little difficult though. But I challenge you to push those boundaries because that'll give you more of a holistic view of your students' capabilities in class. So let's talk about some of these examples of ways that you can kind of get a bigger picture view while being a little bit more creative. And I like to think, like I said, this is where the fun begins. Have a little bit of fun with it. Going back to my science background, in middle school and high school science, we did a lot of concept mapping, specifically with vocab words. So giving my students an array of vocab words throughout a unit and allowing them to make connections between those words and having them describe those connections and explain them to me as a teacher gave me a really good idea as to if they were understanding that content or not. So that can be a really fun way to assess your students with concept mapping. I also really enjoy choice boards. I think it's really great to give students choice and voice in your classroom. And that's just going to allow them to have that much more buy-in when it comes to the assessment. So giving them multiple ways to really demonstrate their learning, that's probably going to get your kids to, okay, yay, I'm definitely ready. Let's give it a try and let me show you what I know. Next, we have project-based assessments. I want to give a little shout out to Lisa. Hey, Lisa. And last month's webinar. Lisa led last month's webinar completely on project-based assessments, and I learned a lot from that webinar. And project-based assessments are a great way to assess your students' learning. They make them more realistic to students' lives, talk about real-world problems, and allow students to really kind of come up with their own answers for those to demonstrate everything that they've learned in your classroom. Another way to assess your students could be through performance assessments. I had the opportunity to coach in a career tech district at the end of last school year, and those students at that school through their career tech classes participate in what are called career tech skills competitions. So instead of those students just kind of, spewing out the content that they've learned, they actually demonstrated all the skills that they learned in these skills competitions. And I think that's a great way to really figure out where your students are throughout the lessons that you teach them. And then finally, peer and self-assessments. I think it's really great for students to be reflecting on their own learning. And then you as the teacher can take a look at that, have a nice conversation with the student and see where you need to go from there. But I think it's also really effective and important for students to assess each other. Assess could be a little scary of a word when it comes to peer assessment, mainly having students give each other constructive feedback in order to help each other progress. They can really learn from looking at each other's work. This is one example of a creative way in which I've seen some students in the past really demonstrate their learning. So like I said, I'm a former science teacher, but this was actually an end of year art project that some of my students took part in their art class. This was part of a choice board. So the art teacher gave the students a bunch of different options in ways that they could demonstrate all of those skills and creativeness that they learned throughout the school year. And one of them is demonstrated in these pictures. So some of the students had the opportunity to actually go out to the parking lot at the school where I taught. And they were given basically a bunch of criteria that they needed to follow when it came to creating their art. And you can really see these students are so creative. They have all of the creative bones in their body. I could use one of those creative bones probably. But this was just really cool. I was excited to see this. And they were really excited to participate in this. It probably felt more like, just having a good time, but at the same time, the teacher was able to assess them on everything that they learned. Alrighty, so because I am a tech coach, I got to talk a little bit about tech. So bringing in some tech to these assessments. You can really liven up your assessments with technology. And I think gamified assessments is a great way to do that. Quizzes, Kahoot, and Blooket were definitely go-tos in my classroom. Kids love competition for the most part. So I think that also gives students a lot of buy-in as well. If they're able to compete with each other in more of a gamified format, you're definitely going to get a lot of participation from your students. As well as interactive simulations. So as a former science teacher, we try to do as much hands-on learning in my classroom, but that's not always an option. So there are a lot of interactive simulations online that students can partake in and still learn a lot similar to hands-on. So some of my suggestions would be Gizmos. Those are science labs. They also have some math labs in there as well as PhET labs. So if you haven't checked either of those out, I would definitely give them a look. One of my favorites is definitely digital portfolios. This allows your students to get really, really creative in a couple of different formats. Students could create a digital portfolio in a Google site, and they could add in their learning kind of throughout the year or throughout a unit, whatever works for you in your classroom. Book Creator is another one that I actually pulled from one of the teachers that I currently coach. I just introduced Book Creator to the elementary teachers that I coach, and one of their first thoughts was, wow, this would be really great. I could use a book in Book Creator to actually allow my students to insert their learning throughout the year. And then at the end of the year, they could have this whole book to demonstrate everything that they've learned in my class. So I thought that was very interesting. And then Canva. I'm a Canva lover, and there are a lot of great templates on Canva specifically for digital portfolios. And then finally, video projects. We all know students love to take selfies, record themselves, kind of hone those interests, I would say, in the form of Flip or a Screencastify, or if your students are on Chromebooks, they could use the Screencast app to record their screen or record themselves to demonstrate everything that they've been learning in your class. And these are just some examples that I came up with. So taking a look on the left, we have Canva. Again, this is just one of the many digital portfolio templates that Canva offers. And again, a student could have their own copy of this and then get really creative and insert all of their learning in whatever form they would like, and then have this nice, awesome portfolio as kind of like a prize at the end of the year. And then, like I was just talking about Book Creator, this is actually a Book Creator template, and it's called My Digital Portfolio. And this would be a great way for students to get really creative, personalize their book, but then also kind of put in little tidbits of everything that they've learned throughout the school year. I'm going to come back to this just for a second. I did mention hands-on learning a little bit ago, and as a science teacher, that was so important to me. Anytime I could get my kids, working hands-on. You can see here, this is a frog dissection lab. Some students were a little, standoffish at first, but once they got in there, they were really excited and were able to really easily demonstrate their skills that we learned in class when it came to dissecting a frog. So this was possible one year. But it's not possible all the time. So this Gizmo virtual lab is a great resource as well, or alternative if you need some sort of dissection lab to use with your students. Gizmos is definitely the place to go. So students can demonstrate their skills in both ways. Alrighty, AI to the rescue. So we all know that AI is definitely a buzzword, and I am on that AI train. Two of my favorite AI tools currently are Magic School and Diffit, and I just introduced my teachers to this throughout the school year, and they were pretty jazzed about it. So as I explored both of these tools, specifically Magic School, it's all tool-based and made specifically for teachers, and they had a lot of great assessment options. So they had a whole tool just for project-based learning, a whole tool to develop science labs, as well as choice boards, like we've talked about as well. So this is just a really great way to give you some creativity and kind of get you kick-started. And then you can take your creativity from there to finish up your assessment. You could even create a Jeopardy review game. And then I thought the real world connections tool was very cool. Great way to kind of develop some content, and then you could apply that to maybe the project-based learning tool. And then Diffit is another great one. CERs, or claim evidence reasoning assessments, were used a lot in my science class, and you could create those very easily with Diffit for teachers. Choice boards, like we were just talking about, giving your students choice and voice in the classroom. And then finally, bubble maps. So that would be similar to like a concept map, allowing students to take various concepts and really make meaningful connections between them. So keep that in mind. If you're ever needing a little bit of creativity to spark you off, make sure you check out some AI tools. And these are just some examples that I came up with when I did a little bit of research. Like I was just saying, that real world connections tool, super valuable. All I did was put in the topic of cell division, and then it was able to give me 3 real world connections. I could then take those, make some sort of assessment out of it, and it's really going to get your students to buy in because they are real world. It's very realistic to the students. That's going to get them excited about it. And definitely one of my favorite tools on Magic School AI is the choice board. This is because you can see from all of these different examples here, there are so many ways that students learn, and now there is a personalized assessment form just for them. So this is a cell division choice board. Maybe you have some visual learners in your classroom. They could create a comic strip showing the stages of cell division. Maybe you have some kinesthetic learners. They're always on the go. They like to create things. They could build a 3D model demonstrating those different phases of cell division. So as you can see here, the possibilities really are endless. So make sure you're utilizing some of this stuff to get you going. Alrighty, so we've talked a lot about formative versus summative assessments, how to get creative when creating your assessments. Now your students have taken that assessment. It's time to dig through that data and figure out where to go from here. Okay, so shaping instructional strategies through data. This is truly, in my mind, the power of formative assessments. So making sure that you are having those little checkpoints throughout your lesson, that's really going to allow you to check for strengths within your students, as well as areas for growth. And then from all of that data and all of that analysis that you were able to do, you can start differentiating that instruction to really play to your students' needs. So those students who are doing really great in some areas, they might need some extension activities. And those students who have multiple areas for growth, those students need a little bit of gap filling. And that'll give you a really good picture on which students need more support and what type of support they need. That support could come in the form of stations activities, maybe peer tutoring, scaffolding, so breaking down assignments, and then on and on and on. There are so many different ways to differentiate instruction for your students. But we all know that that can be really tricky, especially with the multitude of ways that students learn. So let's talk about some ways that can be helpful. I'm bringing AI back in to save the day. As I was exploring Magic School AI, I feel like I learn or see a new tool almost every single day. And when I was going to look at differentiation strategies and was trying to rack my brain for ways that you can differentiate for your students based on those assessment results, I found so many tools in Magic School AI. Maybe you have some students who just who struggle to get their ideas down on paper. There's a whole tool for sentence starters. Maybe you have some students, they're all taking a certain assessment, and you're finding out that you have multiple students in your class on multiple reading levels. Use that text leveler app or tool in Magic School to really personalize all of that reading for your students. They also have a 5E model lesson plan, multiple explanations. We talked a little bit about scaffolding. There's a whole tool that will allow you to input an assignment or a chunk of text and completely scaffold it out for you so that your students can really learn in the ways that they need. There's also accommodation suggestions. So after analyzing the data from an assessment, if you're finding that students do need some accommodations in order to fill in some gaps and allow them to be really successful, I would utilize that accommodation section suggestions tool in Magic School AI. That's going to give you some really great places to start in order to support your students. And then also misconceptions. There's a lot of misconceptions within learning. And as teachers, we don't always know them all. So go to that common misconceptions tool and really see what misconceptions are out there, which ones are tripping up students. And then that's just going to help them with their learning. And as I was just explaining, you can level up for all of these different differentiation styles or level down if you need, really just depending on where your students are in their learning. Okay, so I just threw a bunch of information at you. Let's do some key takeaways and some really big points that I want you to take away from this webinar. So again, we talked about formative versus summative assessments, kind of mid-unit check-ins throughout versus the end of unit, whatever you decide to use. They are both equally important though. So make sure you're attempting to use both to really understand where your students are. But don't be afraid to get creative with it. And if you are struggling with creativity, AI to the rescue, make sure you check that out. Student choice is also really important. If you can give your students choices in the way that they demonstrate their learning, so through an assessment, that's going to give them some buy-in. They're really going to want to do their best and perform their best to show you how they're doing in class. Like I was saying, digital versus hands-on learning, both again are equally as important. Sometimes one is easier than the other or more accessible than the other. So make sure using a little bit of both is only going to help your students in the long run. And then finally, make sure you're meeting students where they are. So after you've given them those really creative assessments and you've put in all the hard work, make sure you take a look at the data from those assessments. Do your best to analyze it so that can really inform your instruction moving forward so that your students can be performing at their top peak throughout your lessons. And that is all I have for you today.
Jamie, that was awesome.
Thank you.
100% awesome. And I'm going to brag on Jamie for just a hot second because first off, I'm taking it personally that you said so many times that you're not creative. That is untrue. Untrue 100%. But also, Jamie has been standing on business for the past couple of days, going and doing her thing in Chicago, coming back here to deliver you webinar awesomeness. So please show Jamie some love and, you know, whether it be vibes or real love, however, she's amazing. Thank you, Jamie, so much for doing this for us.
Happy to
Now,
be here.
you're great. You're just the best. So while I go over some amazing FE services, go ahead and drop the coolest thing that you learned in the chat if you want to, or, you know, just think about it. You're allowed to do that too. So if you are someone that's interested in earning or renewing your Google Level 1, Level 2, your certified trainer, that is something that we at Forward Edge can help with. We offer comprehensive training experiences in person or virtual, led by Google certified trainers. So that's really something awesome that you can take advantage of, another feather to stick in your cap, and something that can help you both with your instruction and with how you interact with other people on your team. And here's another awesome FE service. You can meet your specific classroom needs by utilizing our Anytime, Anywhere EduBadge program. Through badges, you can learn about various topics at your own at your own pace. And these are tools, skills, strategies, things that you can really turn around and use in your classroom tomorrow to impact learning with your students. And we've got some amazing people that work on EduBadges that are always cranking out new, amazing, exciting tools and strategies to use in your classroom. So hats off to them as always for keeping up with the times and making things relevant to the classroom as it's ever evolving. And cybersecurity, that is a big deal right now. I don't know if the rest of you had cell service for any part of today. Yours truly lost cell service today, but it makes you think that, cybersecurity and things of that nature are very, very important, whether it be something that happened by accident or something that happened on purpose. And when we work in education, cybersecurity is even more important because of all of the personal information. So if you need tips, training videos, emotional support, whatever you need, we have it here at Forward Edge. So pop down to that link at the bottom of the screen if you're interested in some of those resources that we have. And when you're a coach, if you're a coach, and sometimes even if you're a teacher, it can feel like you're on a little bit of an island sometimes, especially if you're someone that works with specials or if you're like we are, instructional coaches out in the fields at our various districts helping people. So, one of the biggest things is forming a really solid coaching community. And that's something that we here at Forward Edge have worked very hard on. And we have multiple resources available anytime for you to feel like you can build that coaching relationship with people that are not immediately available to you in the next room over. So things from our Restart Recharge podcast, which our amazing Mateus and Katie Ritter host together, to coaching mentorships and the EduCoach network as a whole. All those resources are available to you. And then one of the biggest things that helped me as a coach into finding that group of people that really made me feel stronger as a coach is the Forward Edge Coaches Camp. And that's something that we usually, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, that usually happens in the summertime. So those
Yep.
dates I don't think are out yet, but keep your eyes peeled. If you're looking for some really great strategies, great people, great food, great community, all of that, you might want to look into Coaches Camp and see all of the things that our amazing people have to offer and support you with. And then last but not least, don't forget to sign up for next month's webinar. I think we have Amplifying Student Growth and Achievement coming up. So that's every third Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Go to that link down at the bottom, forward-edge.net/webinars. We've got I think our friend Michael Rausch is coming back next time to talk to us about amplifying student growth and achievement. But we also have an extra special webinar in between this one and our next scheduled one with our Chief Learning Officer here at Forward Edge, Katie Ritter, who is going to be taking some time to sit down with us and address the NETP release for 2024 and address those digital divides in education and how we as educators and coaches can help to address them and maximize student growth and achievement as well. So you can also find that registration link at forward-edge.net/webinars. And hopefully we'll see you on March 6th for that webinar and again in later March for our next one with Michael Rausch. So lots of good things coming your way. Jamie, before we go, just want to say a lot of people shouted out how good you did. So hats off to that. I'm glad that they did. You needed to be told. And
Thank you so much.
without further ado, and if we don't have any more questions, thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you next time here. Have a great evening.